So the novel begins, well, when does it begin? It begins with Cervantes in Europe, and Cervantes is contemporary with Shakespeare. But the English novel doesn't start then, although there are a number of people who people refer to who might be novelists. But in my series, I've chosen to start later. I've started with John Bunyan, who is about 50 or 60 years after the death of Shakespeare. But before him, there are people like Robert Greene, who has the same spelling actually as the later Graham Greene, Thomas Nash. There are two or three writers who write fiction who you could call novelists. But anyway, I start with John Bunyan. And Bunyan is really interesting because he's a dissenter. And he's an outsider, and he is against the state. And he is imprisoned for his dissent in the 1670s. And he writes what I call the first English novel, Pilgrim's Progress, in prison. The English novel begins behind bars. It begins under tremendous duress, and it begins in extremis. So it is a response to extreme social and political pressure. And so the novelist is somebody who has a great passionate point of view vis-à-vis the state. It's an allegory of state repression, written in Bedford jail, and it's the story of Pilgrim on his journey on a quest for truth. And the quest for truth is a theme which recurs again and again. It recurs in the novels of John le Carré. It occurs in Portnoy's Complaint by Philip Roth. It's the quest for answers to a series of problems. And so he establishes, I think quite unconsciously, because there was nothing for him to refer to. There was no novel tradition. He's telling a story about Pilgrim. And he's telling the story of the journey through the Slough, various famous locations, the Slough Despond and so forth. And he has his various companions who will recur later on in English fiction. One of the interesting things about the English novel, as it begins to develop, is there's a kind of internal dialogue, so that, for example, Thackeray's novel, Vanity Fair, takes its title from Pilgrim's Progress. Bunyan begins his story, it's in the first person. As I walked through the wilderness of this world, I lighted on a certain place where was a den, and I lay me down in that place to sleep. And as I slept, I dreamed a dream. Now, a den is a prison. And so he's in prison, and he's doing something which recurs throughout the English fictional tradition. He has a dream. And so he presents this story as being a dream, the story of a dream. But it's a very personal. It has a kind of luminous power to it, and he's going to send Pilgrim on this strange journey. There's a very famous line. He arrives at the celestial city, and Bunyan says, "And so he passed over, and all the trumpets sounded for him on the other side." It's a famous line. And the thing about this story, it's compulsively readable. His protagonist has all these adventures, and it struck a chord from the very beginning. It's never been out of print. It's been in print ever since it was first published.